Secrets of the Frostbound Cottage, an urban fantasy story, Witchlight Magical Mysteries, written by Heather G. Harris and Ella Stone, narrated by Elise Gibbs. Chapter 1. It was probably wrong to wish for a murder or proper kidnapping, but at that point even a decent burglary would have beaten the heartbreak of yet another adulterous spouse. If I hadn't grown up watching my parents' disgustingly soppy rom-com level love story, I'd have been a full-blown cynic by now. Instead I was stuck in this awkward limbo, half cynical, half optimistic, and fully frustrated. And really frustrated. Either way, the glass was half empty, and I wasn't even tipsy. As a PI, I enjoyed being out and about on surveillance, following up leads, knocking on doors and getting to the bottom of whatever I'd been hired to investigate. What I loved was the mystery. Once I knew the truth, proving it was the boring part. I didn't like being stuck at the computer, scanning through surveillance photos or scrolling through pages of credit card transactions hoping to find some hidden clues I'd missed. Yet the grinding drudgery was all I'd done for the last couple of days, and it was soul-destroying. I'd spent virtually the entire day at home, and the walls were starting to close in on me. Lately, I hadn't even had time to fit in teaching self-defense. Martial arts don't have to be formal or boring. I love teaching other women how to kick ass. My classes were often filled with laughter, and as I surreptitiously inhaled the wisps of others' friendships, their flashes of affection and humour supported me. I didn't need my own friendships if I could experience theirs, or so I told myself. My students were human, so I couldn't pick up on their emotions as deeply as I could a magic user's, and it took a ton of effort. But the brief bursts of warmth were enough. Of course, those had to be balanced with the occasional student who came in jangling with fear and an edge of desperation. When too many emotions were whirling around, it was hard to tell who was feeling what. It got overwhelming. I was the worst empath ever. I might have been a magical dud, but I was a great teacher. However, much as I loved the group sessions I ran, it was the one-on-one coaching that showed me the real benefit of what I was doing. Half of my students came to me scared of their own shadows, and they needed more than a group class could provide. I always felt proud when I knew I'd replaced an anxious, fear-filled mindset with confidence and self-belief, and I could usually do it through a couple of weeks of intense mentoring. No one should feel scared to be out walking alone. I saw it as a privilege to empower my women, especially the ones that carried that fear. Like the fear I still carried deep within me. I shifted my numb butt on the sofa and stared at my laptop screen. My red hair swung across my face, and I tucked it impatiently behind my ears as I tried to focus on my job. My proper job. I was currently juggling 2 cases, but one just needed me to write a report, then I could strike it off my to-do list. Mrs. Morgan had hired me to follow her husband for 2 weeks, but it had only taken a few days to discover that his lunch hour gym visits were actually Jill visits. I'd taken a few photographs, so it didn't take too long to finalise the report. I agonised over every marriage-destroying word and tried to couch it in the most diplomatic terms possible. But even so, the photos would devastate Mrs. Morgan. Jill Swan was one of her best friends. This is going to sting like a bitch, no matter how nicely I phrase things. In the end, I stopped prevaricating and worrying about the wording. I knew my report would hurt, but I wasn't causing the pain. That was her husband's callous affair. I knew a couple of PIs who would have dragged out a case like this, milking it to earn more money. But that wasn't my deal. My parents hadn't raised me to con anybody. They'd raised me to protect people. I was the 7th generation of a line of guardians, and the urge to protect was so strongly ingrained in me that I wanted to shield Mrs. Morgan from my own report. But that wasn't my job. So I wrapped it up and emailed it to her with a mumbled apology. Now that Mrs. Morgan's case was tied up with a bow, I could send her an invoice and file it as closed. With that onerous job completed, there was only one other active investigation on my books. A possible dognapping. It was very early days. The dog, BonBon, hadn't even been missing for 12 hours, and there'd been no viable clues so far. I spent much of today reviewing the doorbell CCTV that her owner Rowena had sent me. To be honest, I hadn't dismissed the possibility that Rowena had simply left the side gate open because there was absolutely no sign of forced entry, and she swore she'd last seen her dog in her fenced-off garden. I'm a good judge of character, and despite her assurances, she'd given me total space cadet vibes. Then, there was the barest hint of uncertainty when I questioned her about the side gate. She said she closed it, but when I pressed her, she'd admitted woefully that she wasn't completely certain. She'd explained that she hit that age where menopause was doing its thing and wrecking her memory. I could still remember Mum swearing about the hot flushes. Menopause had hit her young. She hadn't had a chance to grow old. Swallowing the sudden lump in my throat, I strode into the kitchen. A glass of wine would wash down bitter memories that refused to stay in the dark recesses of my mind. Focus on the work. I opened the fridge and poured out a generous measure of my favourite Sauvignon Blanc, Oyster Bay. I took the glass back to the sofa, where my laptop was waiting. I'd reviewed all Rowena's doorbell security, but her neighbours had helpfully given me theirs too, so I had a few more hours of CCTV ahead of me. Still, at least if I had to do tedious jobs, I could do them with a glass of Oy Bay in my hand. Working for yourself was the best. I sat on the sofa and raised the glass to my lips, at the exact moment that my phone blared into life. If it was an unknown number, and therefore likely to be a new client, I always tried to answer as quickly as possible. I like to think that gave the impression that I'm an efficient professional, which is what a client wants in my line of work. But when I looked at the screen, it showed a familiar name. So I took a very large gulp of my favourite fermented grape juice before I answered. Rowena, I greeted my dognapping client. I'm afraid there's no news yet. It's been nearly 12 hours, she wailed. And it's always the first 24 hours that's most important in a missing persons case, isn't it? I squelched down a grimace. I wasn't sure that the 24-hour thing applied to dogs, so I didn't point that out. Instead, I said vaguely, yes, ordinarily. The thing was that this wasn't a normal missing persons case. It was a missing dog. A missing, in her words, not mine, a pure-bred miniature Schnoodle Bon. I'd since learned that was a mix between a miniature Schnauzer, a poodle, and a Bichon Frise, meaning there was absolutely nothing pure-bred about it. Rowena had herself a very fancy mutt. Not that I was going to say that. My client was definitely the sensitive type, and her emotions had jangled on my nerves. Given how muted normal humans' emotions are to me, that was saying something. She was in real distress, and I felt for her. But I was doing everything I could, including working into the evening to review more CCTV footage. That was a downside of being self-employed. Time off is more of a dream than a reality. But hey, I live to work, so who needed time off anyway? Well, have you got any leads yet? She demanded tearfully. I thought you'd have something by now. I'm just waiting to hear back from some of my associates, I replied, truthfully. After reviewing Rowena's CCTV footage and calling her neighbours, I spent the afternoon ringing around my contacts. I was sure one of the tugs on the line would lead to something. The minute I hear anything, I'll follow it up immediately. I promise I'll do everything I could to get your BonBon back. And I will. And you'll let me know if any of your sources contact you, she pressed. Of course, I said, if I think they're giving me a viable lead. I don't want to get your hopes up unnecessarily. Finding her dog wasn't my only job. I also needed to manage her expectations. If she really had left the side gate open, finding him would be a needle in a haystack. I'd already called the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, as well as a few local dog charities and vets. I sent them all a picture of BonBon. If he'd wandered off, finding him at one of the charities was the best case scenario. Rowena made a noise that told me she was the type of client that wanted an update every second of the day. Hopes be damned. She went on. I was thinking, Beatrix, maybe I left some clues around the house that I missed. Should we hire a forensic team? We could do that, can't we? Money is no object. I took a deep breath. There had been no sign of a break-in, and nothing on a doorbell cam to suggest there had been intruders. The camera didn't have a complete view of the area, so access to the house was still possible, but it was highly unlikely. It was far more likely that BonBon had slipped out of the garden and taken himself for a frolic. I was taking her concerns seriously because her anxiety was real. She insisted that he'd never wandered off before. Unfortunately, though, there was a first time for everything. Rowena was convinced that BonBon had been taken and ferried away in one of the cars captured on her footage. But she lived on a busy street. To say the list of vehicle registration numbers was extensive was a wild understatement, and I hadn't even started going through the neighbours' CCTV. I'd already done a load of legwork, interviewing and discounting her neighbours and her gardener. One of the number plates she'd given me had been her husband's car, which was apparently so new that she'd flagged it up in error. Still, I'd done my due diligence, gone through all the plates I could verify easily, and identified the ones I couldn't. Now, I was waiting to hear back from my contacts at the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency and the police to see whether any of those were leads worth pursuing. I told you about his collar, didn't I? Rowena pressed. I'm sure that's why they stole him, because of the rubies on it. But I don't care about that. You can have them as your bonus if you get him back. Her voice was wheedling. All I want is my little BonBon back. Rubies? On a dog collar? I wondered if BonBon had wandered off to protest about being forced to wear jewellery worth more than my car. I know, Rowena, I said gently. I get it, I really do. And I'm trying, I promise. I won't give up. My mum's voice rang in my mind. Never give up, Bumblebee. I won't, I promised back silently, as I always did. Rowena sniffed down the phone, and I felt bad for my annoyance at her repeated calls. She'd phoned me every 2 hours since I'd taken the job, but her dog was family to her, and I knew better than anyone what it was like to lose family. I'll ring my contacts again now. I tried to sound reassuring. I'll hurry them up a little. Thank you. Her voice was warm and relieved. I really do appreciate it, Beatrix. She was still sniffling when she hung up. Missing cases, whether human or animal, are never easy. I like to think I could detach myself, that I didn't get pulled into the emotion of it all. But if someone's feelings were strong enough, I couldn't help picking up on them. And whenever missing family was involved, there was a lot of emotion flying around ready to hit me in the gut. Wanting to stay true to my word, I scrolled through my contacts list and gave both of them another call. Neither answered, so I left messages. I was reaching for my glass of Oy Bay when there was a knock at the door. I froze, fingers brushing the glass stem. It was starting to feel like there was a conspiracy to keep me from drinking my favourite glass of heavenly nectar. I licked my suddenly dry lips. The only person who ever knocked on my door was my landlady, Trini, usually to remind me about the rent, despite the fact that I'd paid it on time every month since I moved in, more than 6 years ago. But it couldn't be Trini because I'd paid her last week. So who was it? I didn't have friends who dropped by whenever they fancied. I'd not had many friends at all, not since I'd left Witchlight Cove. Sure, I had a couple of friendly acquaintances, but they didn't know my address. I didn't give my address to clients, or my martial arts students, and even though I'd had some guys over, once or twice, I'd made it perfectly clear that I didn't expect to hear from them again unless I called, which I never did. So, who the hell was it? When you've been brought up to fight the way I was, the average person wasn't a threat. My concern was that this might not be an average person. My heart thundered. Had my grandmother found me? I gritted my teeth. Hiding wouldn't answer the question. And maybe it was just a door-to-door salesman. There was no need to freak out. I stood up and went towards my front door, but before my hand even touched the handle, I was hit by a wall of emotion so strong that it took my breath away. Fear. Pure fear. Not my grandmother then, because she feared nothing, other than her own mortality. Relief rushed through me and helped to counter the overwhelming feeling of terror and desperation coming from the person on the other side of the door. The feelings washing over me were so strong that I knew without a doubt that the person on the other side of the door was from the hidden magical world. My empath magic didn't connect as strongly with humans, I could pick up their feelings if I tried, but they didn't hit me over the head with a sledgehammer like this person's was doing. Whoever it was, they weren't going to hurt me. I knew that much straight away. They needed me. Really needed me. Their fear was rattling my bones and making my heart race. Their angst was so visceral and strong that it was a real effort to open the door. But I did it anyway, and found 2 wide, red-rimmed eyes staring up at me. "Please," the young girl said, her voice trembling as she took big, rasping breaths. Her hands were wrapped tightly around her waist. "Please," she repeated desperately. "I think you're meant to help me." She was looking up at me so entreatingly that I knew that, whatever she asked, I was all in. Chapter 2. In all my years in this job, I'd never heard someone say I was supposed to help them, as if it was some kind of obligation. That was not how this gig usually worked. I ran my own business, and if I wanted to take on someone's case, that was my choice. Nobody wants to need the services of a PI. People arrive looking like they'd rather chew gravel than hire me. But my young visitor was different. There was something so tangible about her fear that I already knew she was right. I was supposed to help her, and I intended to do so. The girl standing in front of me was in her mid-teens, maybe 15 or 16 years old. She was fresh-faced and looked so damned innocent. She wasn't the type that could get herself into a club with a bit of eyeliner and a cheeky smile. Her eyes darted about as she dubiously examined the corridor of my flat. Her assessment was correct. It didn't look like much, because it wasn't. It was cheap, though, and when your income fluctuated wildly month to month like mine did, cheap was good. "You do help people, right?" she asked as she wrung her hands. Her green eyes were fixed on me, and I was pretty sure it was those eyes that made her look so young. Those, and her clothes. Everyone knows teenagers like to express themselves through their clothing, but I couldn't quite work out what this girl was trying to say. She was wearing a full-length green dress with spaghetti straps, heavy boots, and a bright pink baseball cap. She had a large, rainbow-coloured scarf draped over one shoulder and a gold bum bag strapped around her waist. It was less of an outfit and more of an argument. Either she had an extremely eclectic taste, or she wasn't used to dressing for the non-magical world. My money was on the latter. "Who are you, honey?" I asked softly, ignoring her question. She bit her trembling bottom lip, and a wave of fear blossomed from her again. Magical or not, she was still a kid, a scared one. Then she stepped back. "I'm sorry, I must have got it wrong." She shook her head and turned to leave. "You don't have to go," I said quickly. "You're right, I do help people." I gave her a wry smile, though, full disclosure, I also help myself to biscuits if they're lying around. I motioned towards the sitting room, hoping my weak attempt at humour would settle her a little. "Perhaps you should come in and tell me what you need help with." She looked anxiously behind me to study the room I was trying to coax her into. Apparently something about it eased her fears, because relief billowed from her as she walked into my very humble abode. I waited until she was perching on the sofa before I closed the door. I deliberately didn't lock it, though I usually would have. I didn't want her to think she was about to be kidnapped. No, that dubious honour had been poor BonBon's. I joined her on the sofa and leaned back, keeping my posture relaxed, like I could soothe her with my own calm. Sadly, that was a skill this lousy empath didn't possess. "So, kid, what's happened?" I asked evenly. "Why do you need my help?" The trembling in the bottom lip increased. "My parents. They've gone missing." So that was why her fear had resonated so deeply with me. Parental loss. You couldn't get closer to the bone than that. I crossed my fingers that her loss wasn't permanent, like mine had been. "Do you think you can help me?" she asked. The tears she'd been holding back so bravely were now tumbling down her cheeks. "I think you're meant to," she said desperately. I think that's why they guided me here." I need you to... I need... She was sobbing now, barely making sense as she tried to drag in breaths. I gave her a sympathetic smile. It's okay, just let it out. With no tissues nearby, I grabbed a roll of kitchen paper and handed it to her. It wasn't elegant, but it was absorbent. She pulled off a sheet and blew her nose noisily, before reaching for another piece. As she wiped her eyes and face, I studied her. We were in the centre of London, but her boots were caked with thick mud. Although there were parks and open spaces nearby, the weather had been unusually mild and dry for April. But her ankle-high boots were covered in sludge, as if she'd been walking in them for days. I got the scary feeling that she might have done exactly that. But it wasn't just her boots that weren't sitting quite right with me. Okay, I said gently, when she had herself under control. I'm going to try to help you, but I'm going to need to ask you a few questions first. Is that all right? Yes. She nodded quickly. Yes, of course. Great. First, I'd like to know your name. Could you tell me that? It's Orla, she replied. Orla Oakenfold. My parents are Simone and Barry Oakenfold. Thank you, Orla. Now, if you don't mind, I need you to take off your hat. I wouldn't have thought it possible, but her eyes widened even further. Her pupils dilated and her green irises seemed to glow faintly, as her lips pressed tightly together. I promise you're safe here, no matter what, I said evenly. I just need to know all the facts. Do you understand? Her mouth remained a perfect straight line, as she nodded slightly. A moment later, she reached up and removed her cap. Her hair was so blonde it was almost white, but it was what lay beneath it that held my attention. Her slender ears were slightly larger than mine, or any humans that I knew of, and they rose to a perfect point. I'd done my damnedest to leave my magical upbringing behind me, and yet here it was, knocking on my door. I maintained a poker face, with effort. Her ears weren't the strangest thing I'd ever seen. Ezra, one of my best friends in Witchlight Cove when I was a kid, had been a werewolf, and I'd lived in a town full of magical beings for most of my life. But I'd been outside that world for more than 7 years. I pushed the magical world away. Hard. Yet here it was, clawing me back. Even in Witchlight Cove, I'd never encountered a being like Orla. Still, I didn't need to have to meet one to know what I was looking at. Mum's education had been thorough. You're an elf, I said. Though it wasn't a question. She nodded. Yes, I am. Well, I said, leaning back slightly on a sigh. Let's start at the beginning. Chapter 3. 1,000 questions ran through my head. Where did elves live? Why weren't there any in Witchlight Cove? What magical powers did they have? It wasn't just nosiness. I wanted to know so that I could assess the level of threat I might face if she turned on me. Some fey folk, like sprites, had a nasty toxic bite, though they rarely used it. This girl might not have looked like she could poison me with a nip, but that was the point. Innocent looks did a great job of luring people into a false sense of security. And she looked as innocent as the Disney Snow White. Not the real Snow White, of course, because she was reputed to be a real scary bitch. I knew next to nothing about elves, and my parents would certainly have warned me if they'd been perceived as a potential threat to the eternal flame that we guarded, so I probably didn't need to be too worried. Besides, Orla was clearly distressed, and the last thing I wanted to do was to make that worse. My questions could wait, but finding out about her situation couldn't. I started gently. Do you have a picture of your parents? She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded, well-thumbed photograph of 3 beautiful blonde elves. I took it from her and studied them. They all had matching green eyes and pale skin. The male, Barry, had broad shoulders, but an athletic build, and Simone had the same waif-like form as her daughter. They were peas in a pod. I handed the precious picture back after snapping a copy of it with my phone. Beautiful family, I murmured. Tell me what happened to your parents, Orla. When did they go missing? Been over a week now, she said. 9 days. 9 days? I tried to keep my voice and my posture neutral. My clients didn't usually have magical skills, but most people could read at least a little body language. I had learned that if I showed the slightest hint that their case might not be smooth sailing, that they would start to worry. Still, 9 days was a long time. Her parents could already be on the other side of the planet. And where were they when they went missing? I asked. Did they go missing from home? No. She shook her head. They went away for the weekend for their anniversary to the Rollright Stones. They're in Wiltshire. Do you know them? It was my turn to shake my head. No, I don't. It's like a mini Stonehenge, she explained. A very mini one. The facts were mounting up, so I picked up a pad and started making notes. Excuse my lack of knowledge, but are they important to you? The stones, I hastened to add, in case she thought I meant her parents. Obviously, her parents were important to her. I mean, are the stones powerful or symbolic for elves? She smiled sadly. They're important to my parents because it's where they first met. That's why they go back each year. But no, they're not important to most elves. Of course, there's magic there and we do visit, but no more than any other supernatural sect. Wherever there are trees, that's where magic is for us. Elves plus trees equals magic, I scribbled. Not the most in-depth description, but it would do as an aide-memoire. I briefly wondered if I could get Orla to use the sad potted fern I kept on the windowsill as some sort of magical protection. My flat was woefully thin on wards. I looked up from my notepad. Okay, when were you expecting them back? The following day. They always spend one night there and I stay with my aunt. They've had the same routine every year since I was born. Usually they come back around midday, but this time they didn't. When they hadn't returned by nightfall, I knew something was wrong. Her bottom lip was back to trembling again. Poor kid. She was doing her best to hold it together, and I ached for her. But I kept my emotions from my face. She needed my professionalism, not my sympathy. Still, the not knowing was the worst. I placed my notepad on my lap as I looked at her. You said you always stay with your aunt. Was she not worried that they hadn't come back? A flash of anger flickered in her eyes. Yes, of course she was, she spat. We went to the village elders that night, but they didn't want to do anything. Outrage coloured her tone. They said we probably got muddled. Then 2 days later, when my parents still hadn't returned, they said we should just focus on living our lives. What? The word exploded out of me before I could contain it. There went my carefully fostered neutrality. I'd heard a lot of crazy things on this job, but expecting someone to focus on living their lives when their parents were missing had to be up there at the top. Right next to, I'm sure the vampire who bit me was just playing. Why would they say that? Do you think they're involved? I probed. No. She shook her head, firmly. They were scared, terrified that if something had happened to Mum and Dad, it could happen to them too. That it could happen to all of us. They thought it was safer to do nothing. The age-old philosophy. If I ignore the problem, maybe it'll ignore me back. I'd found it worked brilliantly for unpaid bills and diet plans. Orla continued. They want us to remain hidden. She hesitated. Elves are taught to keep themselves to themselves, to live in strictly elven societies. I guess that explained why I hadn't seen any in Witchlight Cove. But I couldn't stay there. I couldn't just go on with my life like everything was fine. You understand that, right? Tears welled in her eyes again. I couldn't do nothing. My parents need me. I know it. My heart ached with sympathy. Yes, I understood. If there'd been any chance I could have got my parents back, I'd have taken it. Unfortunately, that hadn't been an option for me. Okay, I said. I think that's enough for now. I just have one last question. It had been bugging me since I'd let her in. How did you find me? When you said I was meant to help you, did someone tell you about me? The only person who came to mind was someone from the magical world. Yanni, my forsaken best friend's grandmother, and the local chief inspector at the station in Witchlight Cove. Yanni was a formidable bear shifter, and an excellent tracker. But if Orla had gone to her first, why wouldn't Yanni have helped her rather than sending her to me? The way Orla was chewing on the inside of her cheek made me suspect Yanni had nothing to do with it. The elf was worried she wouldn't be believed. "Trees," she said, eventually with a shrug. "I asked them to help me. I asked them and I did what they said." My eyebrows shot up. "The trees?" I said blankly. "Yes. They speak to you." "It's more like a feeling. I knew I had to come to London, that was my first step. After that, it was just following the feeling. I was guided to the cedar tree you have outside." A smile warmed her face for the first time since she'd entered the room. It was as if, for a moment, she wasn't thinking about her parents. "It knew what type of person you were, that you would help me, and I knew I could trust its judgment." I brushed self-consciously at my trousers. Apparently, nothing screams trustworthy like a woman with coffee-stained jeans and a wilting cactus on her desk. To a non-magical person, what she was saying would probably have made her sound like a complete weirdo. It even sounded a little outlandish to me. But when you'd seen your mother heal your best friend's broken nose with a potion, or watched an old woman you trusted transform into a giant bear in front of you, your perception of what was normal shifted dramatically. Still, her comment had raised more questions than answers. "If the trees can guide you like that, why didn't they guide you straight to your parents?" I asked. Her smile dropped. "I'm not sure. Maybe they don't think I can find them on my own. Maybe the elders are right and whatever happened to my parents is a danger to all elves. So the trees didn't want me to go alone." That made sense. Orla was slight, waif-like. I couldn't imagine her holding her own when she was in a queue for coffee, let alone against some powerful sorcerer or shifter. Just the thought of facing a powerful sorcerer had fear racing through me, as harshly as Orla's fear had done a few moments ago. "You will help me, won't you?" she asked. "My parents, they have money if you—" I pushed aside my own fear. "I'll help you," I promised. The last thing I wanted her to think was that I was taking the job because of money. That wasn't how I worked. Sure, it helped with rent and everything, but this girl's situation was bigger than that. Her relief and gratitude flooded from her body so strongly that it nearly stole my breath. Thankfully, it also pushed away the last vestiges of my own crippling fear. Relief and gratitude were far better emotions to be flooded by, and I gratefully let them buoy me up. "Thank you! Oh, thank you!" She beamed at me and surged to her feet. "When do we leave? We'll need to go to Little Rollright, right? Are we going now?" "We don't go anywhere," I said firmly. "I'll go on my own. I can't risk whatever may have happened to your parents happening to you. It may well be an elven issue." Her face fell, and she slumped back down on the sofa, but she didn't protest. I respected that about her. Too many kids did whatever they wanted, regardless of the consequences. I'd once seen a teen try to outdrink a centaur. The centaur was fine. The teen, not so much. This time, though, the consequences would be on my head, so I wasn't letting a damn thing happen to Orla. Not on my watch. Unfortunately, hers wasn't the only case I had on, and I didn't want to let Rowena down. So much for thinking I had nothing interesting to do tonight other than watch hours of mind-numbing CCTV. "You'll have to wait for me to get back. Get some rest, okay?" I told her. "Do you have somewhere you can go?" Orla chewed on her lip thoughtfully. "I saw a lovely park when I was walking here. Trees are beautiful. I could sleep beneath one of those." It was against my rules to let clients know where I lived, but she was already right here. What I was about to say went even more against my rules, but there was no way I would let her sleep in a London park. That would be a recipe for a disaster. I couldn't have her go missing as well. "You can stay here," I said gruffly, before I could change my mind. "Really?" Her eyes lit up. "Yes, absolutely." As she glanced around, her attention landed on the plants, scattered around the room. Most had wilted, several had brown leaves, and one was now nothing more than a stick in a pot. "Thank you," she said warmly. "I'm sure there'll be plenty to keep me busy." the way her eyes lit up at the plants, I had a sinking feeling my apartment was about to become the set of Extreme Plant Makeover, Elven Edition. Chapter 4. 20 minutes later, I given Orla a brief tour of my tiny apartment and grabbed a small go-bag containing some spare clothes, a spray deodorant, and a hairbrush on the off chance that I'd need to look respectable at some point. I was currently wearing coffee-stained jeans with frayed edges and a rip in the knee. On second thoughts, I packed some suit trousers, just in case. Orla was happily talking to the snake plant on my windowsill, relief still rolling off her. I didn't tell her that such feelings were premature. I was good at finding things, yes, but who knew in what state I'd find her parents? If I found them at all. I squelched down such negativity. After what she'd been through these last 9 days, she deserved to keep hoping. I called a final goodbye and hustled down to my car, which was parked on the road. The sight of my rust bucket made my soul ache. I'd named her Rosie, hoping it would improve her reliability, but if anything, it made her worse. Maybe she was more of a Gertrude. Rosie, bless her unreliable heart, looked like she was auditioning for the role of car most likely to spontaneously combust. The petrol gauge no longer worked, so I had to take a fingers-crossed approach to driving. After one spectacular 12-hour-long breakdown, I'd taken to carrying a huge plastic container of petrol in the boot, which was fine, as long as I didn't get into an accident and die in a fiery inferno. I really hoped I'd make it to Little Rollright. The driver's door wouldn't open again, so I climbed in through the passenger side, performing what could only be described as a 20-point wriggle into the driver's seat. Finally ensconced, I typed Little Rollright into the GPS on my phone. I tried to ignore the tightness in my chest. Any missing persons case was personal, but this one hit so close to home it made my heart ache. 9 days missing. 9. It couldn't end well. I'd been responsible for bringing a lot of bad news during my career. Usually it was about cheating spouses or wayward children who, sometimes quite rightly, had no intention of ever going home to their parents. But I'd never had to break news like that which I'd once received. And I hope to hell this wouldn't be the first time. I found Rosie's key among the jumble on my keychain, which now weighed enough to qualify as a weapon, and cranked her into life. She sputtered awake with all the enthusiasm of a pensioner being dragged to a nightclub. I gave her an encouraging pat on the dashboard. Good girl, Rosie. Let's at least try to make it to Oxfordshire, yeah? As I started to back out of my parking space, my phone rang. The name Dean appeared on the screen, and a satisfied smile pulled at my lips. He was one of the contacts I was waiting to hear from. Fingers crossed he had good news about BonBon. The first time I'd seen Dean was in a bar 7 years ago, and my initial thought had been that he was certainly worth taking home for an evening. That was until I started talking to him. Learning about him as a person didn't make him any less attractive. It just shifted the source of my attraction towards him. He was single, 33, and worked in the intelligence unit of the Met Police. While he loved his job, it definitely came with its fair share of frustrations. I'd figured out straight away that I could have one night of fun, then never see him again because, well, that was how I worked. Or I could see if we could strike up something close to a friendship where he trusted me enough to help out occasionally on cases. All these years later, I knew I'd made the right choice, even if the sight of him in tight jeans and a plaid shirt occasionally made me doubt myself. It didn't help that I knew he felt the same way. In those 7 years, his longest relationship had only lasted 6 months, and he always said it was because he was holding out for me. I was pretty sure he was only half joking. Almost every conversation ended with him asking me out for a drink, but I always said not yet. I didn't say no because I really wanted to say yes. It wasn't just a case of not wanting to mix business with pleasure. I liked Dean. He was a great guy and the closest thing to a friend I had in the human world. But I didn't want to be responsible for breaking his heart. He knew nothing of the magical world, and by our laws, that was the way it had to stay. Besides, he liked non-magical Beatrix, the martial arts teaching, head-screwed-on, kick-ass PI. I didn't think a Met intelligence officer would cope well with finding out that the real me was a magical orphan whose inheritance involved becoming the guardian to an all-powerful, dangerously magical flame, even though I was a magical washout. For the moment, I was willfully ignoring my destiny, but I knew that one day it would knock so hard I wouldn't be able to ignore it. Then again, maybe telling him the truth was what he needed to move on and forget about me, at least in a romantic sense. I shifted the car back into park. "Dean," I said, "have you got some information on the dog theft?" "It's so great to hear from you too, Stonehaven," he replied snarkily. "I'm really well. Lovely of you to ask." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help the little smile that flickered at the corner of my lips. "I'm sorry, you're right," I said, a shade more warmly. "Dean, it's lovely to hear from you, especially if you have news about the dog theft, which I seriously hope is why you're calling. The owner's going crazy, and if I don't come up with a lead soon, I'm going to give her your direct number and tell her you're the man to talk to." He probably didn't realize how dire that threat was, but I truly was tempted so he could be the lucky recipient of the 2 hourly calls instead of me. He chuckled. "Fine, I guess I should be flattered. Most women just want me for my abs." "The dog, Dean." He sighed, though I could tell it was in jest. "Yeah, so there's been a spate of dognapping cases around the Greenwich area. That's where yours was taken, right?" "Yep." "Well, case is about split wide open," he said with satisfaction. "About half an hour ago, someone rang in with a noise complaint. Said they'd heard lots of dogs barking about 2 miles from the latest theft." It sounded positive, but not the smoking gun he seemed to think it was. "Surely you lot get a fair few noise complaints about dogs," I said dubiously. It was a pretty big leap from a complaint about barking to feeling confident he'd found a dognapping ring, and I didn't have time to chase up a dud lead when Orla was counting on me to find her parents. "The person who called said it sounded like there were loads of dogs, like a kennel, and it wasn't in a residential area. It's industrial." He stressed the last word, as if I needed it reinforcing. "No dog pounds or boarding houses near there?" I sat up a little straighter. Maybe it was a smoking gun. "None that I could find," he said smugly. "In fact, the area has a load of empty units. It's near enough abandoned." I started to smile. "So it's the perfect place to hide a bunch of kidnapped dogs?" "Why, it's a distinct possibility." It really was. Excitement skittered through me. This was good. If I found BonBon, I could put all my energies into finding Orla's parents afterwards. "Can you ping me the address?" I asked. I was pretty sure of the answer. He wouldn't have called me if he wasn't going to give it to me. "Doing it now," Dean promised. Right on cue, my phone buzzed with the location. "Are you guys already there?" I asked, carefully. As a PI, you have to tread carefully when working with the police. In some situations, I didn't mind them getting to the scene first. But in this case, I wanted to retrieve Rowena's Schnoodle without any red tape. The police could deal with the dognappers and the rest of the dogs afterwards. I wanted to be in and out before anyone knew I was there, so I could get back to Orla's case. Besides, I couldn't imagine Rowena's response if her precious pup had to go to the pound before their much-needed reunion. She'd probably end up putting BonBon in counselling for the trauma, not to mention herself. "Lucky for you, we're having a busy night," Dean confirmed. "There's a big protest in the centre of town. Dispatch reckons they'll get there in about 40 minutes. I thought about the roads and how quickly I could get there. Provided traffic wasn't bad, I could make it in 30 minutes. 25 if I put my foot down. That should give me time to find the Schnoodle and get the hell out of there. "Thanks for this, Dean. I owe you one." "By my account, you owe me about 20. He chuckled, then sobered. "There's no point in warning you that these guys could be dangerous, is there?" He knew what I did as a hobby. "So am I," I replied firmly. "I suppose you are. Just tread carefully, okay?" "Oh, well, I was going to go in with a klaxon, but if you think I should be quiet, I'll give that a whirl," I said sarcastically. He laughed again. Then he asked me the question which, by now, had become almost a tradition. "How about you let me take you out for a drink one night?" I gave my usual response. "I'll definitely think about it. Catch you later, Dean." I hung up. I had a dognap Schnoodle to find. Hang tight, BonBon. I'm coming for you. And if any dognappers got in my way, they were about to meet the business end of my cactus keychain. Chapter 5. There was nothing like going into a dark, abandoned urban area to give you that impending sense of doom. I got it if you were stealing anything, whether it was dogs, jewelry, cars, or whatever. You were hardly going to announce it with a large neon sign. I'd lost count of the number of times I found myself in places like this, with flickering street lamps and graffiti staining the boarded-up doors. Needless to say, they weren't my favourite locations. For once, it would have been great if someone could do their nefarious dealings in a nice sunny location, maybe by the beach in some waterfront villa with big windows and golden light pouring through. Or maybe a crime could take place in a freaking meadow. We could give the sheep a backstory. It would totally work. Was it so much to ask? But no, it was always this kind of dark wasteland that gave off a creepy vibe, where the shadows seemed to tremble and rats scuttled about. Not that I had anything against rats personally, but they were never a great omen. I slowed and parked up behind another car. A security camera was swiveling lazily out front. Getting caught on camera wasn't something I particularly wanted. Yes, I was following a lead, but I was also trespassing a smidge. Being arrested by the very non-magical police would give me more paperwork than a taxman on a caffeine binge. And while I admitted to being the most useless witch in any generation of my family, being arrested would be a massive headache, not just for me, but for the entire magical community. I would cause a whole heap of fuss they didn't need, and I didn't want to lay that on them, not after the pain my family had already inflicted on them. With that in mind, I planned my route to skirt around what I estimated was the camera's field of vision. As soon as I cut the engine, I knew exactly which warehouse I was heading to. I'd made good time, and I should have at least 10 or 15 minutes before I was joined by the cops. Easy peasy. Whoever had called in the barking hadn't been joking about it sounding like a kennel. The racket was cacophonous. I couldn't imagine how many dogs were in there, but I hoped the one I needed was among the woeful pack. Slipping my cluttered keychain into my pocket, I edged towards the building and stopped at a large rust-coloured door that matched Rosie perfectly. Although I turned the handle and pushed hard, it didn't move. It was bolted from the inside. An open door would have been too easy. I was good at picking simple residential locks. Everyone has to have a hobby. But deadlocks secured from the other side were way beyond my skill set. I needed another point of ingress. The windows were at least 10 feet above the ground. I scanned the area and smiled. There was a large industrial bin sitting beneath one of them, and it looked like it would hold my weight. Perfect. Nothing ever goes wrong when it starts out with a climb on a bin. I hustled over and put my theory to the test. Because the windows were high up and the warehouse looked decrepit and abandoned, chances were good that I could simply push one of them open. If not, I'd have to break the glass, and I'd move from trespass to breaking and entering. It wasn't an ideal solution, but I'd done it before, and no doubt I'd do it again. I gave the window a solid shove, and grinned when it creaked open a foot or so. Yahtzee, I could easily slip through that. When I peered down into the warehouse, there was good news and bad news. The good news was that I could see a crap ton of caged dogs. The bad news? There was a 10-foot drop to deal with on the other side, and I was fresh out of superhero capes. Annoyingly, there was no obliging bin for me to step on too. Long drops weren't my favourite, but I jumped bigger ones, both here and in Witchlight Cove. Ezra was a pro at them, but I didn't have a werewolf or shifter's athleticism. All I had was good old human training. I knew how to fall, all martial artists do, but it was trickier in a situation like this where I couldn't choose my angles properly. I tucked in my chin and covered my head with my arm, just in case something went wrong, then leapt and landed with a solid thunk that jarred straight up to my molars. Not exactly graceful, but hey, I didn't break anything. Deducting some points for style, I gave myself a 6.5. I straightened, only to find dozens of pairs of eyes staring at me. It was like being judged by an audience of fluffy critics. The caged black and white dog closest to me cocked its head, clearly unimpressed by my entrance. "Well, excuse me, lassie," I muttered under my breath. Next time I'll bring a smoke machine. A quick glance told me that none of these dogs were BonBon. Not the black and white beast in front of me, nor the shaggy one with the soulful, weepy eyes, nor the tiny black scrapper in the corner who looked like he could bite my ankle clean off. There were a lot of dogs here, and I needed to find the one I'd come for. Hopefully the police would take care of the rest of them. I started forward into the darkness and prayed that BonBon was among this motley canine crew. Chapter 6. BonBon. My voice was barely more than a whisper. The last thing I wanted was to draw anyone's attention because I suspected the people running this operation weren't the shiniest of crystal balls. They were housing stolen dogs in central London, which was not a particularly bright idea. Why not add a giant sign outside that said, "Dodgy business happening here"? If they'd had any sense, they'd have rented a quiet suburban home, where barking wouldn't have raised a single eyebrow. As I crept forward, the first thing that hit me, besides the urge to start lecturing the masterminds behind this operation, was the stench. Sweet Merlin socks. It was awful. The acrid tang of urine and feces filled the air, and I had to cover my nose with my jacket sleeve to avoid gagging. Whoever had left these dogs in here clearly had no interest in basic hygiene, or basic humanity. By the looks of things, some of the dogs had been there for days, and clearly had no choice but to foul their cages. Whoever had done this was absolute scum, and they deserved a significant punishment. If I got my hands on them, I'd happily deliver it. Thinking of the beast responsible for these poor animals reminded me that the door was bolted from the inside. The person who put the dogs in here had either locked it and gone out another way, or they were still in here with me. Terrific. What was a rescue mission without the thrilling possibility of a surprise confrontation? As I approached the back wall of the warehouse, where there was another row of kennels, a sudden banging on the bolted warehouse door startled me. "Police, open up!" Damn it, they'd arrived sooner than Dean had thought. His timing was clearly about as reliable as his dodgy knee. I froze as I debated my next move. I hadn't seen anyone in the warehouse, but that didn't mean the place was empty. Also, depending on which police officers were on the other side of the door, I could be in real trouble. No doubt Dean would smooth it over for me, but that would take time. Time that Orla's parents didn't have. As I debated my options, I turned back to the rows of cages. And then I saw him. Quiet amidst the chaos, not barking like the other dogs, BonBon was cowering at the back of his cage, his paws covering his eyes, as if he couldn't bear to see what was about to happen. I couldn't see the ruby-studded collar Rowena had described, but it didn't matter. I knew without a doubt that this was her beloved BonBon. The police pounded on the door again. "Open up, that's your last warning." I grimaced. They were coming through that door whether I let them in or not. Either I helped them, or I appeared to be part of this whole mess. But at least I'd located BonBon. I wasn't going to waste time hiding until the police left, so I had no option but to open the door and hope for a friendly face. I went over and unbolted it. Private investigators don't carry an official form of ID, but I reached for my business card and prepared to explain myself. When I pushed open the door, I realized that wouldn't be necessary. "Beatrix?" a familiar voice said. "Gaza?" I grinned at him as relief washed over me. London is truly massive, but whether through fate or because I work far too much, I come to know a fair number of the local constabulary, and that included the kindly officer before me. Gaza was a short, bald Scotsman who liked to show me photos of his grandchildren at every opportunity. He was a good, solid cop, and the chances were he'd let me take BonBon and leave. Behind him stood a younger officer I also recognised, Tanya. She was relatively new to the force, but she seemed competent and kind, although tonight she was hanging back a little and looking unusually nervous. "What have you got, Beatrix?" she asked, her voice tight. She peered past Gaza. "Is anyone in the building?" "Not that I've seen," I replied carefully. I didn't say no outright. Assuming the place was empty could lead to someone letting their guard down, and that wasn't what you wanted in situations like this. I only just got in myself. That's a lot of dogs. Gaz's tone matched Tanya's in nervousness, and his hand was twitching slightly. You working a case? I nodded. Yeah, a missing Schnoodle, Bon. A what? A real fancy mutt, I said with a wry smile. And happily, I think I've found him. If it's okay with you, I'd like to take him back to his irate owner as soon as I can. Because then, I could get started on Orla's case. I turned, ready to go to the back cages and retrieve BonBon, only to find both Gaza and Tanya standing in the doorway. Exchanging a look I couldn't quite read. What? I asked. What am I missing? Well, thing is, Gaza began. We've called the animal handlers, but they might take a while. And they'll expect us to wait and secure the area. And neither of us is really good around dogs. Tanya finished. That's what we bonded over. We're both cat people. Gaza added solemnly, as if confessing to a heinous crime. I stared at them. The Metropolitan Police, everyone bravely facing London's criminal underworld, unless it had 4 legs and a wagging tail. Gaza fished a trembling hand into his pocket and pulled out a pristine pack of cigarettes and a lighter. His wife had been nagging him to quit. Judging by his shaky resolve, Jean was about to be sorely disappointed. I sighed. I had another case I needed to be working on, but in my job you can't afford to piss off the police. Besides, it'd be even better if they felt like they owed me a favour. Gaza and Tanya looked terrified, and these dogs needed someone around them who wasn't scared. Plus, Gaza and Tanya would owe me big time for this one. And if anyone else walked in, I'd just say I'd volunteer because, as we all know, Crazy Dog Lady is at the pinnacle of public relations. I can help you, I promised. I can wait here for at least, I checked my watch, 15 minutes. But can you leave me out of the paperwork? I'm on a missing persons case too, and you know that time is of the essence with those. I didn't mention it had already been 9 days. And if I stay here to help you out, could you take BonBon back to his owner? I know you're good people, I don't mind not mentioning you in our report, but... A dog? In our car? Gaza looked horrified. It's a really small one, I assured him hastily. Tiny, and he's totally timid. Trust me, you'll be fine. I held out my hand for the lighter and cigarettes. Give me those. You know your life won't be worth living if Jean smells smoke on you. Gaza grimaced and passed me the contraband, which I promptly tucked out of his sight. Maybe I could keep him on the straight and narrow a while longer. I headed back to wait with the confined dogs. It seemed like the least I could do. Smell be damned. Chapter 7. By some miracle, the animal handlers arrived within 10 minutes. We'd still not seen any sign of whoever was behind this. I'd have bet money they had either heard me coming in and scarpered, or they were too drunk or high to notice. Drink and drugs often go hand in hand with the criminal element, and some of them try the wares they peddle. It was unlikely that dogs were the only thing this crew was dealing in. I was beginning to think that the dognappers weren't the sharpest athame, given that many of the dogs still had their collars with addresses on them. Unfortunately, the collared canines weren't the only dogs I'd found. There were also 4 cages brimming with puppies that, by the looks of things, had lived their entire life in confinement. It made me feel ill. Come on out, you guys, I said softly, as I opened the cage doors. BonBon was already safely settled in the back of Gaza's squad car, and I rung Rowena to tell her that the police would return her darling within the hour. With so many dogs and so few hands, I figured I could spare another 10 minutes to help, although, by some miracle, Tanya seemed to be getting more and more relaxed with each dog she encountered. By contrast, Gaza had declared himself allergic to anything taller than a handbag, which explained why he was sticking to the chihuahuas. Out you get, little ones. A handler sidled up beside me to scoop up the last set of puppies as they scurried through the cage door. One slipped past her. Can you grab it? She asked me, her arms already full. Sure, no worries. I wasn't going to miss the chance of a quick puppy cuddle before I left. I followed the pup, but despite my best encouraging noises, the little golden retriever continued to race towards the staircase at the back of the unit. Puppy, what are you doing? I called impatiently. Come here. With a slight yap, she definitely had female energy, ran towards me. The second I crouched down to pick her up, she turned and bolted back to the stairs. "What are you doing?" I repeated, exasperated, as she did the same thing twice more. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, she clambered up the first 3, then looked back at me. "You want me to come too?" I said slowly. I looked up and lowered my voice. "Is someone up there?" If we went upstairs and I found a treasure trove of squeaky toys, I'd feel like a total idiot. The dog tipped her head to the side, as if beckoning me to follow her. I guess we were doing some lassie crap after all. I sighed. There was no chance I would leave her, and both handlers were already busy. I put my foot on the bottom step to follow the tenacious little creature, and her gratitude hit me with such force that I had to stop. "So this is what you wanted?" I said, as she glanced back at me impatiently. "Okay, I'm coming. I just hope you got something nice for me up there." If ever there had been a ridiculous thing to say when heading upstairs in a warehouse housing stolen animals and a puppy farm, that had to be it. As I pushed open the door, I heard a creak from behind the desk, and knew exactly what the puppy had been trying to tell me. The arsehole had been hiding there the entire time. "You can come out now and I'll make it easy for you," I threatened gruffly. The puppy was now running back and forth between the desk and me, as if I'd not worked out for myself where the culprit was hiding. "I have things to be getting on with. Please don't make this any harder than it needs to be." That was the moment he stood up. His eyes were red and glassy. He was high then. Without waiting for me to speak again, the golden retriever pup raced over to him, bit down on the hem of his trousers, and held onto him for all she was worth. Had I been thinking sensibly, I would have called Tanya and Gaza, but I wasn't used to having anyone to call on. Then again, given what happened next, it was probably a good job I didn't holler for the humans. The guy was trying to shake the pup off, but he wasn't actually saying anything. He wasn't yelling or swearing the way I'd have expected. In fact, he didn't make a single sound. Stupidly, in the moment, I didn't think anything of it. Instead, I offered him a swift elbow to the temple with the intention of knocking him out, so that the police could deal with him and I could get the hell out of Dodge. And that was when the you-know-what really hit the fan. A surge of gratitude from the pup hit me like a punch in the stomach, almost knocking me off balance. I gasped and staggered back, narrowly avoiding the man's fist as it flew towards my jaw. Thankfully, years of training meant I anticipated what was going to happen next. Before he could get his next strike in, I threw a swift punch to his temple and knocked him down. He crumpled to the ground as I rubbed my knuckles with satisfaction. The pup continued to growl at my feet, her small body trembling with adrenaline as she faced the unconscious man. Her lips were pulled back in a fierce snarl as she bared tiny teeth that still seemed far too big for her size. "It's okay," I murmured to reassure her, though my voice wavered. "He's down." I wondered what this man had done to this tiny, brave pup, because her hatred of him was deep and strong. "It's okay," I whispered again. But her growl only deepened before turning into a sharp bark that sliced through the silence like a warning bell. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, a primal instinct and an undeniable sign that things were about to go from bad to worse. "Pup?" I started to reach for her but froze mid-air as her gaze darted to the man's chest. Following her lead, my eyes locked on him and on the dark, writhing shadow that was peeling itself away from his body. The air thickened, charged with a suffocating energy that pressed against my chest. The dark shape, smoke-like yet disturbingly solid, rose and spread tendrils that slithered and twisted like living things. They reached out and clawed towards me. "Oh, hell," I whispered, dread curling through me. "This is bad. This is really bad." The pup barked again, her small frame trembling but resolute as she faced the shadow beast that was slithering towards us. I envied her courage because my stomach was churning with fear. It was a demon. Demons weren't just bad news. They were catastrophic. Taking one down would have been a challenge even in Witchlight Cove, surrounded by all the magical resources I'd once had. But here in the non-magical world, without the eternal flame, I was way out of my depth. I thought of Gaza, Tanya, and the poor helpless dogs below. I might have been badly out of my depth, but it wasn't time to tread water. I couldn't let anything happen to them, not on my watch. My pulse thudded painfully, and the edges of my vision blurred as the malevolent force pressed on me. "Pup, you can't take it on," I hissed, my voice barely audible over her barking. "Come away, now." The demon shadow reared higher from its comatose human host, its inky form coalescing into a vaguely human shape. A pair of glowing red eyes snapped open like fire-lit coals and locked onto me, my body tense with the weight of its malice. For a second I was frozen, lost in memories of another night filled with darkness and death. Then the puppy growled and I was back in a moment I'd rather not have been in. Fight or flight. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. But where? The door was too far away and the demon would be too fast. Then there was the pup. I couldn't run and leave her to a fate worse than death. I needed magic. Powerful magic. And I had none. I wasn't treading water, I was going to drown. I needed someone to send me a magical lifesaver, or at least a weapon. All I had with me was a very heavy set of keys. Maybe the cactus keychain would be my salvation. Maybe I could prod the human host in the eye and the pain of being blinded would make the demon leave. As I pulled them out, I suddenly remembered something that might help. More than a stupid plastic cactus keychain. A gift from Maddie, my childhood best friend. She was an alchemist, and she'd given me a vial that she'd said would protect me. She warned me not to use it lightly, but this was as dark as it got. A demon. A goddamn demon! I clawed through the tangle that jingled like mocking laughter. Keys for the studio, keys for my flat, for Rosie, plastic trinkets and tiny souvenirs. Why did I have so damn many? The demon gave a guttural growl that reverberated through the room and rattled the furniture. Its tendrils shot forward fast as a whip, cracking into the floorboards inches from where I was crouching. "Damn it, come on!" I snarled, my hands trembling as I dug through the clutter. The pup yelped as the demon's strike came close to her, and she darted between my legs as if I could protect her. "Stay back, girl. I've got this," I lied. Finally, my fingers closed around the glass vial on the keychain, and I yanked it free, pulling out the cork with my teeth. I was in such a panic that a tiny drop of liquid sloshed out and fell on the dog. The rich, metallic scent of magic hit me like a thunderclap, a heady reminder of Witchlight Cove, of Maddie, of all that I'd left behind. But there was no time for nostalgia. As the demon lunged, I didn't think, I just acted. With a scream, I flung the vial and the entire mess of keychains at its gaping maw. The vial shattered mid-air, releasing a surge of Maddie's inky purple magic. The demon's scream tore through the room, shrill and ear-splitting like nails dragged across a chalkboard, but amplified 100-fold. The windows exploded inwards in a shower of jagged shards, and the floor trembled beneath me. "Down!" I shouted, scooping up the pup and throwing us both under the desk as glass rained down. My arms curled protectively around her tiny frame, and I felt her heartbeat hammering against my chest. The demon thrashed, and its shadowy form unraveled as its tendrils were torn apart by the liquid's raw power. For a moment it clung on, its burning red eyes locked on mine with pure hatred. Then, with a final, wrenching wail, it dissolved into curling wisps that faded into nothingness. Silence fell, save for the sound of my ragged breathing and the pup's soft whimpers. I stayed down, my body shaking with fear and adrenaline. But as the little dog nuzzled closer, her warmth grounded me, and I dared to lift my head. The demon was gone. The only reminders of its presence were the shattered window and the lingering stench of sulphur. "Jesus, Maddie," I murmured. "How the hell did you do that?" She was an alchemist, but she'd only been 18 when I left. How on earth had she made something so powerful it had vanquished a demon? She'd been practicing with my dad, working with the eternal flame, but even so. I was still trembling. It'd been so long since I felt out of my league, so long since I'd practiced magic. I was strong, fast, and tough in the human world, but in the magic world I was rusty as hell. My mum would have had my guts for garters. "Good girl," I murmured to the pup, my voice cracking. You did a great job scaring it off. A demon, a freaking demon here. No wonder so many dogs have been taken. When there were enough of them, demon would have sacrificed them all and used their lifeblood to coalesce a permanent hold on its human host, locking itself in place with the screaming souls of the innocent. I went cold thinking about it. Thank goodness for Rowena and BonBon, or this whole thing could have gone under the radar until the demon was too strong to beat. And I was lucky that Maddie had been practicing with the eternal flame because she clearly wrought the strongest protections into that vial. It made my heart ache anew. I really should ring her, even with all that she represented. I missed her like hell. The puppy licked my chin, and her tail gave a tentative wag. I sagged against the desk, still stroking her soft fur with shaky hands. We make a good team, I said. But as my eyes flicked back to the unconscious man, unease gnawed at me. If a demon had been possessing the human, had the man invited it in? A moment later, he groaned and rolled over. It was the first sound he'd made, and a sure sign that the possession was over. Picking up the pup, I walked over and kicked him, none too gently. Stay down, I growled. Demons picked their hosts carefully. They went for the truly bad guys in the hope that people wouldn't think their malicious behaviour out of character. Possession or not, this dude was surely a wretch who deserved whatever was coming to him. He groaned again and moved as if he was going to stand. Possession or not, I wasn't letting him get away. I gave him a solid roundhouse kick to the head, and he slumped back to the floor, unconscious. I checked his pulse to make sure he was out. Then I cuffed him. Once he was secure, I picked up my ridiculous bundle of keys and pocketed them, empty vial and all, then grabbed the happily wagging puppy and carted her away from her captor. You did real good, I murmured to her as I jogged down the stairs. She licked my face, and her tail wagged even harder. Chapter 8. Before you go, I said to Gaza, there's a perp upstairs. He shouldn't cause you any trouble. He's unconscious and I've already cuffed him. Two officers exchanged a look. It wasn't my fault, I protested, raising a hand in my defense. He came at me first. Gaza smirked. For someone so petite, you seem to leave an awful lot of people unconscious. What can I say? I shrugged. It must be my sparkling personality. It clearly overwhelms them. The grizzled cop chuckled. Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And don't worry, we'll get this little pom-pom back to his owner now. BonBon, I corrected. Tanya cradled BonBon in her arms. The tiny dog, with its ridiculously fluffy coat, looked thoroughly pleased by the attention and wagged his tail frantically. It was a far cry from the animal who'd been cowering in its cage when I first arrived. Wasn't he in the car? I asked curiously, noting how closely Tanya was now holding him. I thought you didn't like dogs. Oh, he was lonely. She protested. I'm not sure he counts as a dog, does he? Oh, he's more like a living teddy bear. She had a point. BonBon did look more like a teddy bear than the golden retriever puppy I was holding. Looks like that one's yours, Tanya teased. Oh no, she's definitely not mine, I said quickly. My life is not conducive to having a dog. I'm going to take her over to the animal handlers. Good luck with that, Gaza said, motioning behind me. I turned to see the red taillights of 3 large vans pulling away. I'm pretty sure they said they were completely full, he added. And they seem to be stressing over how they're going to home so many puppies. I glanced down at the soft golden ball in my arms. There was no denying it. She was one of the cutest puppies I'd ever seen. Not to mention the most fearless. And the love that resonated from it when she looked at me was so strong that you didn't need a hint of magic in you to feel it. I couldn't imagine it would be hard to find her a home. Families, older people, young couples. Thousands of people would love her. Anyone but me. Could you take her? I asked, in a last-ditch effort to palm off responsibility for the pup. You could see if anyone at the station would like her. I'd love to. Gaza gave me an exaggerated sigh. But bringing her in will mean a week's worth of paperwork, and we just don't have time for that. Trust me, she's better off with you. He slid me a look that wasn't as sly as he thought. Well, you could just leave her here to fend for herself. I gritted my teeth. He was obviously goading me. We all knew there was no chance that I'd leave her. But that only left me with one option. Are you sure you don't want to drop this one back to his owner too? Tanya said. The use of the word too suggested that she also assumed I was taking the puppy with me. You were the one who found him, and it was your case. Thanks, but I have another matter that's pretty urgent. If you don't mind taking him home, I've still got a bit of a drive ahead of me tonight. I'm fine with that, Tanya said, snuggling him closer. You know, I think I might quite like one of these. What breed you say it was? I grinned. Something ridiculous. I'm honestly not quite sure what the mix is. You'd best ask his owner. I was a little sad to miss out on reuniting BonBon with Rowena, because I knew she'd be absolutely overjoyed. But what mattered most was that it happened. I had more important things to do. Tanya took BonBon back to the car, and Gaza went upstairs to assess and hopefully arrest the unconscious perp. I looked at the puppy in my arms before gently placing her on the ground by my feet. This is a short-term arrangement, I said firmly. She cocked her head. I don't work with a partner, I continued, as we walked towards the car. And you don't want to be my partner, trust me. I'm not very good at this whole relationship thing. You understand that, right? I'd probably be the worst dog owner in the world. She didn't respond. Instead, her little legs hurried beneath her body as she kept up with me. The moment I opened the car door, she hopped in and settled in the passenger seat as if she belonged there. I rolled my eyes. Fine, I said, as I got into Rosie and closed the door. But you better warn me if there are any more demons. Got it? She flashed me a doggy grin, and her tail tapped the seat. Good enough. That totally counted as a binding contract. Chapter 9. When I finally reached Little Rollright, it was less than ideal time to start an investigation. Firstly, it was the middle of the night. Secondly, I had no idea where I was going or what I was looking for. And thirdly, I was absolutely knackered. The puppy had done her best to remain awake, struggling to keep her eyes open as if she were forcing herself to stay up for my sake. Knowing I probably missed more than I'd noticed in my current state, I pulled into a lay-by, cut the engine, and pushed my seat all the way back. A couple of hours' kip would make all the difference. My eyes had barely closed when I drifted off. It was the sound of bird calls that finally stirred me from my sleep. As I gave a long yawn, I was surprised by how well I'd slept. Normally, my dreams were filled with images, flashbacks of when my grandmother had arrived in town and ruined my whole life. Often, I awoke because of my own screaming, or the screams of the other people who'd been there that night. But as I breathed in another long yawn, I realized I hadn't suffered from any of that last night, and I actually felt refreshed, although unusually heavy. As I opened my eyes, I saw why. The puppy was curled up asleep in my lap, and somehow my arms were wrapped around her as if I'd been cuddling her all night. Her warmth flowed through me, and a tide of positive emotion radiated from her little frame directly into me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been surrounded by such affirmative feelings, and I hadn't realized how much I'd needed it. No wonder I'd slept so well. For years, I'd convinced myself that the occasional flashes of gratitude from clients or students were all the reassurance I needed. But feeling this, dare I say it, love, directed so openly at me, made it hard to believe I'd been right. She was definitely a great cuddle buddy, but I couldn't get attached, even if she was the reason for my most perfect night's sleep in years. Come on, you, I said softly. We've got work to do. And do you know what a good work day starts with? Breakfast. Popping her back onto the passenger seat, I reached into the back of the car and pulled out my go bag. Together with the deodorant can and clothes, I had a fair supply of snacks, including several breakfast bars. They were hardly the most nutritious start to the day, but they filled a hole. As I opened the wrapper, two eyes stared up at me eagerly. Don't worry, this one's for you, I promised. I've got another. I handed her the unwrapped cereal bar, hoping that there was nothing in it a dog couldn't eat, then took out a second one for myself. Within 2 minutes, we both polished off our meals, and it was time to get to work. I'd have to pick up some proper dog food soon. We need to start by finding these roll-right stones, I said to her, as if she could understand me. See if we can find any clues there. What clues might elves leave behind? My mind came up empty. I didn't know anything about them, although there was one person I suspected would do. Yanni, my best friend's grandmother. She'd raised Maddie and taken me in after my parents had died, and she had been the cornerstone of my life in Witchlight Cove, even before I was orphaned. No one in the world commanded my respect like Yanni did, but like every part of my past in Witchlight Cove, I'd left her and Maddie behind. I needed to because what my grandmother had done hadn't just affected me, it had affected so many people in our magical community. I hadn't been able to cope with that burden any longer, which is one of the reasons I'd run away. The other reason was the cloying memories that were too much to bear. I did my best to shove down those memories and focus on the present. It had been an age since I'd last spoken to Yanni, but I knew she'd still pick up when I called. That was who she was. I tried to ignore the slight tremble in my fingers as I hit dial. She answered almost instantly. "Bea?" Her voice, crackly yet warm, came down the line. It was clear from her muffled tone that I'd just woken her. "Oh crap, sorry, I didn't check what time it was," I apologized, glancing at the car clock to discover it wasn't quite 6 a.m. "Did I wake you up?" Of course I had. "Oh, I'm sorry, go back to sleep. I'll ring you later." "Don't be silly, Beatrix." The sound of her voice was like catching the scent of home on a breeze. "It was time I got up anyway, and you know you can ring me whenever you need me, day or night. Is everything all right? Are you coming back home?" It was the question I hated the most, and the reason I hardly spoke to my best friend, Maddie. It was always the first thing she asked, and I dreaded it. My throat tightened. "Not just yet," I said finally when I knew my distress wouldn't sound in my voice. "I just wanted to ask you something. I'm on this magical case to do with elves. Do you know much about them?" "Elves?" Her tone dropped slightly. I couldn't tell if it was disappointment in my answer or something else, but I didn't have the headspace to unpick it. "Well, they're sticklers for balance, that's for sure. They believe chaos and order must exist in harmony. You know, yin and yang stuff," she said eventually. "We used to have family in Witchlight Cove. They came, 20 or 30 years ago now, wanting a change of pace, I think. 6 of them. Lovely family. But I think it was the grandmother who got sick or something like that, so they had to leave. They wanted to be back with the rest of their kin. If I remember correctly, they wouldn't even try to use any of the local healers." "So they have close-knit families?" I asked, thinking of Orla. "Very close-knit," Yanni replied. "They like to keep themselves to themselves. I think it was timidity more than anything. They were quite fearful of things, even in Witchlight Cove." Strong family unit. Fearful. That tallied with what I already knew about Orla. "What about their magic?" I pressed. "I know it's related to trees and plants." "Oh, yes, they have a wonderful link to nature. You should have seen the flowers they grew. Any season, winter or spring, didn't matter. I remember them growing bluebells in a field of snow once." Her voice was wistful as she recalled better times. That must have been something. I was about to ask another question when I was interrupted by a high-pitched bark from my canine companion. "Is that a dog?" Yanni said, a smile in her voice. "Have you got yourself a dog? It's complicated." I turned to shush the puppy, but stopped short when I saw her little black nose pressed against the window as she stared at the fields beyond. A field of bright pink orchids. Orchids. Outside. In England. In March. "Sorry, Yanni, I've got to go," I said quickly. "I think I found something. Thank you for your help. Send Maddie my love." "I will, but please ring her, Beatrix. Oh, she misses you so much." "I will," I lied, guilt clawing at my chest. Thankfully, the guilt and the heartbreaking memories were easy to push down when I was working. I was fully aware that it was wrong for a teeny part of me to be thankful that I currently had a case. Because this one was a doozy. Chapter 10. Just because I'd never seen a field of orchids in England in March didn't mean it wasn't possible to grow them. I definitely wasn't a horticulturalist. Maybe I'd just been oblivious to their growth patterns and they were always around at this time of year. A hasty internet search told me that wasn't the case. Orchids thrived in warmer climates like in Asia, and even the hardiest couldn't cope with the frost. If they'd been in a polytunnel or greenhouse, I'd have understood it. But these were out in an open field, surrounded by leafless trees and brown grass. The entire scene looked unnatural, so how the hell were they growing there? One word sprang to mind. Magic. I opened the car door, ready to see what I could find, but before I could climb out of Rosie, the puppy leapt across my lap and scrambled out onto the grass. "Hey, what are you doing? You're meant to stay in there," I called, pointing firmly to the car. She turned her head to the side and gave me a withering look. A moment later, she relieved herself on the grass. "Oh," I said, feeling guilty. I'd not even thought about letting her out to have a pee and a poo, and I was grateful she hadn't done it in the car. "Good point. I'm really sorry about that. I'll do better in the future," I promised. "Right, now that you're comfy, get back inside the car, please. I don't want you getting into trouble while I'm trying to find these elves." I gestured towards the open door, assuming she'd helpfully jump back inside. But instead, she started sniffing delightedly at the grass. She lifted a paw and batted at it, delighting in the crunchy sound it made. Oh heck, she'd never been out of her cage. She raised her little head and sniffed the air, her tail wagging so vigorously there was a real risk it would wag right off. I watched the soft smile on her face as she looked in wonder at her surroundings. Then she turned away and started trotting in the opposite direction. The beautiful moment broke. "Oi! Dog!" I called after her, a pang of annoyance striking me. Much as I loved her positive emotions, I wasn't half as keen on the negative ones. If I'd wanted those, I'd have stayed in Witchlight Cove. She ignored me. Seemed she didn't like being called dog. "I'm not naming you," I called after her, well aware of what had caused her annoyance. "Owners name their dog and I am not your owner. We're just companions for now." She glanced back at me with what looked alarmingly like a smirk and kept trotting away. "If you get yourself lost or injured or—" I stopped mid-sentence. The puppy had stopped too, on the edge of the orchid field next to a very narrow pathway. Though it hadn't rained last night, the earth was damp and there were several clear footprints leading away from us. "I guess this is the way we're going then, Pooch," I said. Something told me she wasn't going to sit quietly in the car, and I didn't want to waste any more time. Besides, I didn't want her to attract unwanted attention by barking if I left her alone. It looked like she was coming with me. I tried to pretend it was my decision. The track was narrow, but went straight through the flowers. It reminded me forcefully of my earlier thoughts, when I'd wished for a crime scene in a meadow. Well, lucky me, perhaps I'd manifested a nicer location for suspicious activity. I looked around at the eerie sight. There was definitely something going on here. The flowers were so bright and luscious that even if it had been summer, I would have expected them to be growing in a greenhouse. Even so, the beautiful setting made it hard to feel the same sense of foreboding I had when I stepped into a dark warehouse or a dimly lit alley. At the end of the orchid field stood the quintessential English thatched cottage, the kind of picture-perfect house you'd find on a postcard or a chocolate box. It was so picturesque that it was almost impossible to believe that something bad could have happened here. Yet, as the dog bolted towards it, that was what my gut told me. I called her back in as quiet a whisper as I could manage. "Not yet, hold on. I need to check something first." Thankfully, she listened, ran back and sat obediently by my feet. So far, she'd seemed obedient, as long as my orders happened to coincide with her wishes. I praised her nonetheless. "Wasn't that how you trained a dog?" I patted her. "Good girl. Now we need to move slowly and carefully. Otherwise, we could get into trouble. No barking. Stealth is the name of the game." She looked at me like she understood me, and I had a brief flicker of hope that my abysmal magical skills were growing. Maybe my empathy meant she really could understand me? When my magic hadn't flourished as it should have done, my parents had been determined that wouldn't be a barrier to me assuming my inherited role as guardian in Witchlight Cove. As a Stonehaven, it was my birthright, and when my parents had passed, it had become my duty, one I'd promptly abandoned. My parents had tried to imbue me with as much knowledge and moral fibre as possible, but evidently they'd failed. I pushed down the old hurts and looked around. This wasn't about my parents, this was about Orla's. I had to find them, and my gut said they were here. If, like so many others in my position, I couldn't feel where magic was taking place, I'd have to rely on spotting signs of it. If anything untoward was going on here, the trees were the best place to look for clues. Scanning the area, I spotted a large oak and walked towards it. I was still 3 feet away when I saw a sign that made my stomach twist. Honey fungus, I muttered darkly. The dog tilted her head, but I didn't bother explaining what the fungus meant. She wasn't going to use the information, but I could. Honey fungus is invasive, spreading beneath the surface of the soil and affecting everything in its path. The yellow-coloured growth occurs in the non-magical community too. It is a parasite, feeding off dying trees and accelerating their demise. But in the magical community, its growth was strongly associated with black magic. And this amount of it was definitely not a good sign. Well then, I glanced first at the dog, and then at the cottage. Shall we see who's home? Chapter 11. As I wasn't sure what we were about to face, walking up to the door and introducing myself didn't seem like the best idea. Instead, I walked to the windows which, unlike the ones at the warehouse, were at normal height. Unfortunately, their height was about the only thing that was normal. What the hell? I whispered in disbelief. If the orchids seemed out of place for the climate, the inside of the cottage was equally unusual, but in the opposite way. As far as I could see, the place was completely filled with ice. Frost patterns covered the glass, while the floor appeared to be slick and glossy, like a frozen pond. Long icicles were hanging from the ceiling. There were several windows offering different views onto the ground floor. Hoping to gain a little more information, I moved as quietly as I could to the next one. The pup stayed at my heels, not making a sound. If I hadn't known better, I would have assumed she'd made perimeter checks before, or maybe she was just quiet because of the thunderous noise she'd been born and raised in, like a person from a family with 10 kids who grew into a quiet adult. The second window gave us a different aspect of the same room, but as I peered through a third window at the back of the house, I stifled a gasp. There, bound at the wrists and ankles, their skin so pale it was almost translucent, weren't just the 2 elves I was seeking, but 8 of them. Their eyes were closed. Had it not been for the shallow plumes of breath rising into the air as they exhaled, I wouldn't have believed that they were even alive. Still, I couldn't imagine they had long left in temperatures like that. But I had no idea how I was going to get them out. They were frozen, locked in an icy hold. I was a good fighter, but only when I had my feet on solid ground. Like any person who kicks and punches, I used friction. I needed it to harness the force to overpower my opponents, not to mention change direction and move fast. But a place covered in ice would have no friction, no stability, and no advantage. I'd be no better than Bambi on the frozen pond. As far as I could tell, the only positive was that the culprit responsible for all this didn't appear to be downstairs. I'd already spotted a staircase through the second window, so there was a good chance the kidnapper was asleep upstairs. If that was the case, I needed to act fast. But how? I couldn't carry Orla's parents with eyes like that on the floor. I needed to melt it either by destroying whatever spell had caused it or in some other way. As I stepped back from the house, I thought through my options. If this had been a human issue, I would have called Dean or Gaza, or any number of my police contacts because they'd know someone local who could help. But this situation was as magical as they came, and the nearest magical community was hours away. I could have called Yanni, but she was also hours away. I kept visualizing those slow puffs of breath. Some of those elves didn't have hours left. Maybe a little of Maddie's ink would have helped, but I'd used it all in the warehouse on that friggin' demon. However, I had picked up something else while I was there. I reached into my pocket, suddenly grateful that I'd forgotten to give Gaza his contraband back. My fingers found a small metal lighter. It wasn't much, but it could start a fire, right? And fire could melt ice. The only problem was that I needed something to accelerate it. I had something that could work, but it could potentially burn down the whole damn cottage around the frozen elves' ears. I weighed the risks and made a decision. It was possibly a hasty one, but my parents hadn't raised a quitter. Never give up. I didn't intend to. Chapter 12. I sprinted back to the car, not even checking to see if the pup was at my heels because somehow I knew she would be. Like it or not, I had a shadow. And, inconvenient as it might be, I thought I might actually enjoy the company. It was someone to bounce ideas off, even if she didn't bounce them back. I reached into the car, grabbed my bag, and emptied the contents onto the back seat. I'd only bought spray deodorant because it was on offer at the supermarket. Sometimes, luck was better than judgment. Okay, I've got a lighter and an aerosol can, I said to the puppy. That should give us a big flame, but it's the ground we have to focus on. If the ice on the floor doesn't melt, I won't even be able to stand upright, and I can't be skating everywhere while I try and haul those guys out of that icy prison. And you need to be quiet. Stealthy. You got it? She barked, which was kind of the opposite of what I just asked, but that was on me for acting as though she understood every word I'd said. Or maybe she did, and she was just trying to warn me how monumentally stupid my idea was. It wasn't that I disagreed. Melting the ice on the floor wasn't the most comprehensive of plans because I still had to revive and untie 8 elves, all of whom appeared to be on the brink of death. Then I needed to get them out of the house and away from danger before whoever or whatever had taken them awoke and decided to fight back. It wasn't going to be straightforward, but straightforward was for pussies. Anything you want to add to this conversation? I asked, glancing down at the pup. Obviously, she didn't respond, but I saw she'd found a large stick and placed it by my feet. Now is not the time to play fetch. I rolled my eyes. The eye rolling reminded me of something, and I tapped my lip. Actually, that's not a bad idea. I picked up the stick. Go! Collect as many sticks as you can. Fetch! I raced to a nearby hedgerow to do the same, as she trotted off and returned quickly with more sticks. At first, I thought she was just enjoying the freedom of running around and grabbing random items for fun, perhaps emulating what I was doing. But as the pile grew, it became clear that she understood exactly what the brief was. She picked only dry sticks that were perfect for kindling, and some of them were so large I was amazed she managed to carry them. I was impressed. Maybe having a canine partner wouldn't be so bad after all. I tested my planned aerosol and lighter technique briefly, and was completely taken aback by the noise it made. I muttered, that won't work, too loud. The pup whined and looked cautiously at where the flame had been. I patted her. Sorry, I forget you're new to all of this. That was fire. It melts snow, but it's hot. Stay back from it or you could get hurt. As I was thinking, I tapped my fingers on Rosie's boot, then grinned when a better idea presented itself. I opened her boot and looked at the can of petrol. Now we were talking. Come on, Fido, I whispered. Let's move. A wave of annoyance rolled off the pup and I flashed her an impudent grin. Apparently, my girl had standards, and Fido wasn't her preferred name either. Still, it'd have to do for now. We had more important things to focus on. When we reached the front door of the cottage, I peered through the windows again, to ensure the captor hadn't returned in our stick-gathering absence. There was no sign of anyone else, and, as far as I could tell, none of the elves had moved so much as a hair's breadth. It was go time. Ready for this, girl? I asked quietly, glancing at the dog. You can stay in the car if you want to. Her ears flattened to her skull in a clear no. Okay, well, just stay out of the way. I don't want you getting burned. She barked softly as if she understood, and I tightened my grip on the can of petrol. Let's rock and roll. Chapter 13. Since we were doing a stealthy break-in, I was prepared to use my lockpicks, but the door opened as soon as I gently pressed the handle. That was useful and unnerving in equal measure. What kind of kidnapper didn't lock up their captives? The kind that knew they were never getting away. That's who. That didn't bode well for the amateur hour that was about to follow. As soon as we walked into the frost-filled home, I built a quick fire and used a little petrol to get it started. I flicked the lighter, lit the kindling, and a small flame leapt into life. I watched impatiently as the ice around us started to melt slowly, revealing an area of wet floor. Though that patch was substantially less slippery, the remaining ice was taking far too long to melt, and most of the floor was still like an ice rink. I looked at my trainers and wondered dubiously whether I should risk a spot of skating. The puppy suddenly moved towards our impromptu bonfire. "Careful," I hissed to her as she grabbed one of the flaming sticks. "Those are hot." I shouldn't have worried. She'd taken it by the unlit end and was dragging it just above the ice, her little feet splaying outward for balance. It rapidly became clear that she'd agreed with my assessment that the fire was taking too long, and she was trying to clear a path for me to walk on. "Good girl! Good girl!" I murmured. Her claws clicked on the ice as she went forward bravely. But a few steps later, the flame went out, and she was forced to go back for another stick. It was the slowest approach to save victims I'd ever seen, as we inched forward and tried to remain silent. She was barely warming the ice. "Good idea," I murmured to her, "but I think we can improve on it." Skating it was. I unscrewed the top of the petrol can and crept across the ice, pouring a little petrol as I went. Before long, I'd done a painstakingly slow lap of the room. "Mind out of the way," I cautioned the pup, then flicked the lighter again and watched the flames leap along the trail of petrol. The fire didn't burn for long, but it left a melted path so I could reach the elves. And, most importantly, I hadn't set the whole place on fire. Yay! There was a tiny bit of petrol left, but not much, so I put the can a careful distance from my little bonfire, which was still burning nicely. I froze, as I thought I heard a creaking noise above me. Maybe it was from the heat we were creating, or the noises of the old thatch house. Or, maybe, it was the creature that had caused all this waking up and coming down. I swallowed hard and fervently hoped it wasn't the latter. Moving far more quickly now we had a proper path, I ran back to the elves and bent down beside Orla's mum, Simone. I shook her gently. "I've come to get you out of here," I whispered next to her ear. "Can you hear me?" As I shook her a little harder, desperation reared its head. "Can you hear me?" I repeated. Her large eyes blinked, and fear flashed across her pale face until she focused on my face. Confusion clouded her expression. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, and the fear had returned. "You need to get out of here," she whispered desperately. "Leave, hurry, save yourself, leave before he comes." "I've got you, it's okay," I said firmly. "I'm here to help you. Who's doing this? Can you tell me who's done this to you?" Her face scrunched with pain as she forced out the words. He's in so much pain," she said, her forehead creasing. It was clear that she was weak and could barely think straight. I suspected she was talking about her husband, Barry, whose plumes of breath were growing fainter. "Do you have any strength left?" I asked. "Any power? Any magic?" She squeezed her hands tightly and shook her head. "He's drained it all," she said weakly. "Flowers. He forced us to make the flowers. But wait. Maybe." Her eyes squeezed shut as though she were trying to force some semblance of magic to resurface. "No, don't. Save your strength, okay?" I said. "Just tell me, do you know how he's doing this? How is he draining all your power? If I know that, maybe I can work out how to stop him." Her chin dipped slightly, and she looked down, but all I could see was the water pooling from the melted ice. "It's on me," she said faintly. "On my chest." As I moved my hand to her shirt, I met her gaze, and she nodded, giving me permission to open it. The moment I ripped apart the fabric, I saw it, Embedded in her skin directly over her heart, a small stone was pulsing faintly with icy blue light. "Do you know what will happen if I pull it off?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, but if you don't, I'm as good as dead anyway." Her bright green eyes locked onto mine, giving me permission to try. And I knew that there was no other choice. "You're Orla's mother," I said. "Simone?" Her lips parted in a small gasp, and her brows furrowed. "How do you know Orla?" Her voice trembled. "How do you know my baby girl?" "She sent me to find you." Tears welled in the elf's eyes. "My darling, I love her. I want you to tell her." She choked on her words. "Tell her we love her so much. We should never have left her." "You're going to tell her yourself," I said firmly. "I'm going to get you out of here." The puppy wasn't being idle whilst I spoke to Simone. She was trying to wake the other elves by nudging them gently with her cold, wet nose. I turned back to Simone. Who knew if my next action would condemn her or save her? But if I couldn't release her magic back to her, she wouldn't survive anyway. When I raised my eyes to hers again, she nodded firmly. "Do it." I clawed my fingers around the edge of the stone, praying it hadn't gone deep enough to kill her when I removed it. Holding my breath, I closed my eyes and, with one sharp tug, yanked the embedded stone free from her flesh. Simone desperately smothered her gasp. Her head snapped back, and for a heart-stopping moment, I feared the worst. Then, a rush of colour flooded through her body as her skin warmed with life. "My magic," she said. I can feel it. It's coming back." Her relief and awe hit me with such force that I struggled to breathe. I was woefully out of practice in containing my empathy skills. In the human world, I didn't need to be careful, and I got damned sloppy. I sucked in a couple of desperate breaths to get my emotions under control. "That's great," I said with a smile. "Let's get the rest of them free. You help this one. I'll go to the far end of the room and help the others. We can work our way into the middle. Just rip out those damn stones as quickly as you can." Simone nodded decisively and turned to the elf nearest to her, her husband, Barry. I headed for the elf at the far corner of the room. I was clasping the stone in his chest, ready to pull it from him, when a scream pierced the air. The heart-wrenching shriek was so loud that the house shook, giving me flashbacks to the demon's final moments. The colour drained from Simone's face, and she turned to me, eyes wide in panic. "He's awake," she whispered in a trembling voice. "He's awake, and he knows what you've done." Chapter 14. "Work fast," I said to Simone, trying to swallow the fear that was rushing through me, both hers and my own. It was a deadly, heady mix that risked freezing me in place, so I shoved it down as hard as I could. I was raised to protect, and I'd do it, damn it. Get them free as quickly as you can while I hold him off. The puppy was staring at me expectantly, as if waiting for instructions. "Stick," I said to her. "Fetch." I still didn't know what I was dealing with, but judging by the amount of ice in this place, I guess the last thing the creature wanted was heat and fire. Maybe we could try the old wild animal trick of waving around flaming sticks to keep it at bay. It was worth a shot, and what other option did I have? Loud thumps sounded, and the ceiling trembled, as the creature made its way across the floor above us. It wasn't here yet, though, so I moved to free another 2 elves before ripping off a piece of my torn jeans and dousing it in petrol. The pup returned with a big stick in her mouth, and I wrapped the saturated fabric around it. When I lit the makeshift torch, more heat and light sprang into the room. That was when I saw the shadow looming in the doorway. I turned, heart pounding, only to stop in confusion as something entered the room. Whatever I'd expected, it wasn't this. The shadow had loomed large, which must have been a trick of the firelight, for the creature in front of me was gaunt and small. His features were unusually sharp, but part of that was because he was so scrawny. His eyes had sunk into hollow sockets, and his thin lips were curled in a snarl. He was menacing, for sure, but he was also no bigger than Orla. That was something. I could definitely overpower him, but the problem would be stopping him using his magic. "Thief!" he hissed, as he pointed a bony finger at me. You is stealing them from me. I gave a dry chuckle. I think the term you're looking for here is freeing. And yes, I'm freeing them and you can't stop me. Well, I hope not. But when you haven't got an ace up your sleeve, bravado is all that's left. And I've got bravado in spades. No, you cannot! It stamped its foot. I needs them. They makes me pretty flowers. I likes pretty flowers. A wave of loneliness and desperation hit me with such force that I had to fight to anchor myself in place. If I'd let the feelings rule me, I'd have curled into a ball and sobbed my heart out while butchering Celine Dion's All By Myself. I was holding on to myself with effort, but then the elves' fear hit me too. I froze, unable to ride the maelstrom of too many forceful emotions swirling around me. For a moment I was lost, but then a little wet nose pressed against my exposed leg. Love and confidence swamped me, and, suddenly, I could think again. I took some deep breaths and glanced down in wonder. Thanks, pup. I turned my attention back to the frost monster thing. It was speaking like a kid who'd never had a grammar lesson. Either that, or it had watched too much Lord of the Rings and was doing its best Gollum impression. Are they your preciouses? I sassed. Yes, it snarled at me. Mines! Help me, Simone cried. If we can free us all, then we can... No! The icy creature bolted toward us, but my crazy brave pup darted forward and grabbed one of the flaming sticks from the bonfire. Waving it with abandon, she thrashed her head back and forth so quickly, I worried she'd singe her golden fur. The creature stopped, giving me a chance to dive over to one of the still frozen elves. There was no time for delicacy, or to check that I wouldn't hurt them. I grabbed the stone, yanked, then took the gasp that flew from their lungs as a sign they were okay. We'll get the rest, Orla's mother cried to me. Just stop him reaching us. We can do this. We can end this. That was when I realized her initial plea hadn't been to me, but to the other elves whom she'd already released, of which there were now 4. With the one I'd just freed and her, that made 6. Only 2 more to go. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Did the elves have enough power to stop the creature? And, if so, why hadn't they done that before they'd ended up like this? I didn't waste any more time questioning myself, or the elves' plan. Just chucked the flaming torch at the beast. It skittered away, but immediately crept forward again. Luckily, now that I didn't need to be discreet, I had another idea. I pulled out the can of deodorant, used a lighter to make my noisy flamethrower again, and directed the flames towards the gaunt little thing. They shot towards it, but they weren't high enough to make contact. Even so, its high-pitched cry sent a prickle down my spine. It wasn't being burned, but the closeness of the heat was hurting it. Which was good, right? But it didn't feel good. I suppose that attempting to shish kebab anyone wouldn't feel great, but nausea was threatening to stain my hand. Simone raced towards me and knocked the aerosol from my hand. Stop it, don't hurt him, she pleaded. Let us fix this. Fix him. I'd seen people who wanted to take their own revenge before, and I understood their emotions. If I could have caused my grandmother a fraction of the pain she'd caused me, I'd have done it in a heartbeat. But it wasn't anger on the elf's face. It was something else. Compassion. Step back. Another elf spoke, an older woman with eyes the colour of wheat, and an outfit that could have won first place in a cosplay contest. The cape alone was phenomenal. I totally deserved a cape like that. It was hard to believe that mere moments ago this force of nature had been one of the near lifeless bodies lying colourless on the ground. Now she vibrated with strength and energy, as if she'd necked a double espresso when I wasn't looking. As she stole my attention, I was aware that the psychotic ice fairy, if that's what it was, could easily reach out and grab me. I needed to keep my wits about me, but I couldn't draw my eyes away from the elf with the cape. She didn't need fire to melt the ice. She was doing it her own way, with magic. Vines were creeping in through the windows and under the doors, melting all the ice they touched to leave pools of water. It was mesmerizing. The closer the leaves got to the center of the room, the faster they grew, and for a split second I feared they were going to swallow me whole. But then I realised they weren't heading for me. Several tendrils had already wrangled their way around the ice creature's ankles and were holding him in place. "Let me go!" he screamed, as he realised it was his turn to be secured against his will. "No! Let me go!" Ice shot from his gnarled hands, but this time the elves were ready. They blocked the shards of crystalline water with great leaves that rose to protect them in an armour of greenery. "It's not fair! I want the pretty flowers! I need them!" The vines were up past his thighs. As I watched, they pinned his small hands to his sides. When he was fully secure, the elves started chanting. I'd never heard a sound like it, and my scalp prickled as it called to me in a way I'd never experienced before. Some of the voices were pitched so low that they resonated deep into the marrow of my bones. Others were so high and ethereal that goosebumps rose on my skin. Harmonies blended and resolved in an effortless beauty. Screw Celine Dion, these elves could sing. Every voice was unique and alluring, and I wanted nothing more than to stand there and absorb the sound deep within me. That was when I glimpsed the ice creature standing in the middle of them. Only, he was no longer white and icy. Just like the elves, he was regaining colour. A pale pink tinged his cheeks, and they started to plump out like a balloon being re-inflated. As I watched, the elephant grey in his eyes deepened, first to turquoise, and then to a deep emerald green. But it was his ears that really drew my gaze. The greying flesh coloured and warmed, and then his elven ears were restored to their usual points. "He's just an elf," I said in disbelief. "A child." Chapter 15. By the time the elves had finished their chanting, any trace of the icy creature in his frozen home had melted. Literally. They were standing around a small elven boy, no older than 10. His glare was defiant, but his bottom lip was pushed out and trembling, a sure sign of his fear. "I don't understand," I said to Simone. "What happened? What happened to him? Why did he do this to you?" As Orla's mother turned to look at me, the elderly elf took off her cloak and placed it over the boy's shoulders. He finally stopped glaring and started to cry. "We only know part of the story, what he told us before he froze us," she said. "He was on his own. By the looks of it, he'd been that way for a very long time, possibly since he was a toddler." "What?" I was horrified. She nodded, her eyes showing gentle understanding of my confusion and distress. No child should be left alone for so long, and the thought of it made me sick. I'd been raised with such love, and this poor boy had been raised by a loneliness so deep, it was no wonder that it cut me to the core. "The trees and plants must have kept him alive," the elf continued, "but it changed him. He didn't understand the boundaries in nature, let alone how to interact with his own type. He wanted to use more magic than he had the capacity for." "He didn't realise what he was doing the first time." It was a male elf who spoke. He must have been mid-20s and was wearing far more human-like clothes than the rest of them. Cargo trousers and comic book t-shirt. He was wearing a beanie too, that hid his pointed ears. I wouldn't have even noticed he was non-human had I not known. He stretched out his hand. I took a moment to secure my pathetically weak mental shields, then braced myself and shook it. I was pleasantly surprised when the shields held. "My name's Jonah," he said. "I was the first to find him. I was hiking. He was sitting under a tree, crying. I couldn't get much out of him, but I grew him an orchid in the barren earth, and he was so excited. Unfortunately, 1 or 2 orchids weren't enough for him. With no parents, he hadn't been shown how to control his emotions, and he lashed out. It took me completely by surprise." He shook his head in disbelief. A child like him shouldn't know the power of heartstones. The more power he took from me, the more he wanted. When others came to find me, he captured them too. None of us were prepared to fight a child. I suppose you know the rest," he added wryly. My first thought was exactly how long had it been since Jonah had crossed this elf child's path, and how long had he been in this icy state? Cryogenics was a thing, wasn't it? Orla had said that the roll-right stones weren't of significance to elves. So had the boy just waited here, biding his time until more of his kind wandered through? That could have taken months. Years, perhaps. No wonder the elder elves hadn't wanted Orla to look for her parents. They must have investigated and found out that some of their brethren had already gone missing. They didn't want to send good elves after bad, so to speak. What I had learned was that elves could be incredibly powerful and dangerous, especially if they weren't shown how to use their magic. And families weren't just important to them, they were vital. Without proper care, a young elf could become a malevolent force. "We will take him," the elder elf said as she approached. "We have placed a bind on him for now, so he cannot hurt us." "What will you do with him?" I asked. Maybe he deserved punishment for what he'd done, but how could you punish a child when he hadn't been taught the difference between right and wrong? Nature's definition of right and wrong was certainly different from society's. Could he be blamed for not having an inner moral compass? "We will take him to our home," the elder continued. "There are many of us, and we will work with him, teach him the ways of elves and nature. With time, I am certain he can be saved." I was moved by these people's compassion and empathy. Whether he was a small boy with a sad past or not, he had nearly killed them all. While the first episode with Jonah might have been an accident, I was sure the other 7 times he deliberately entrapped the elves to use their powers. It was ironic, even though my magical gift was empathy, and I had compassion for the young elf. My parents would have had no forgiveness for him. None. Maybe it was good that I hadn't been gifted with my family's more deadly brand of magic, after all. As I started to fall into a pit of memories about what could and should have been, a small bark by my feet broke into my thoughts. The pup was there, sitting at my heels, her wide eyes staring directly into mine. For once, her tail wasn't wagging. It was as if she was waiting for me to speak so she knew how she was supposed to act. I smiled at her. "You're right, we should get back." I turned to Orla's parents, who were holding one another very closely. "Are you ready to go? There's somebody back at my flat who's going to be very excited to see you." Chapter 16. I couldn't stay in my apartment. Firstly, Orla had indeed turned it into a greenhouse. All of the plants were alive again, and all of them had grown. I was more than a little taken aback at the sight of greenery covering every surface. Secondly, and more importantly, the emotions were too much. They were mostly positive, but they were absolutely battering me. There was so much love, so much joy and relief billowing from the family that I had to hold myself up against the wall. After a while, the joy faded, and guilt started to come through. The guilt Simone and Barry felt at leaving Orla. Orla's residual fear was snaking through me too, for even though her parents were home, the body can hold on to dark emotions for years. I knew that, and now she would too. She would never forget those 9 days where terror, grief, and bewilderment had dictated her every moment. It had been a long time since I felt anything that strong, and the poor little boy in the icy house had already given my emotions a magical walloping. I really couldn't cope with any more right now. One thing this brush with death had taught me was that I might no longer live in Witchlight Cove, but magic wasn't done with me, and I couldn't afford to be done with it. From here on out, I was going to practice shielding. One day I'd have to return home, and I couldn't be crippled by my vulnerability. Mum and Dad would have been ashamed of me. Some protector I was. I needed to practice my shielding every day, as I had when I was a kid. After my parents had died, I hadn't had the will to do it, and I'd been battered and bruised by the grief of our magical community. It was one of the reasons why I'd had to leave my home. During that period of grief and apathy, practicing shielding had seemed pointless. But now I knew otherwise. I had given up, and Mum would have kicked my ass if she'd been alive. I hoped it was Orla's parents' guilt that was riding me, but I suspected it was actually my own. I could leave Witchlight. I could abandon the eternal flame, but I couldn't make magic leave me no matter what I did. I needed to get away, so I mumbled some sort of excuse and tumbled out of the tiny apartment. As I headed outside, I felt a presence following me so closely I could almost feel her fur brushing against my ankle. Tears welled behind my eyelids. I was absurdly grateful for her presence. I burst out into the fresh air, sat on the ground, and leaned back against the cedar tree that had led Orla to me. The puppy wriggled and cavorted on my lap, as if staying still was too much to ask of her. She made me smile. "Well, that was an adventurous first day together, wasn't it, pup?" I said. Her head snapped to the side, as I once again referred to her without a proper moniker. Even if I hadn't been able to feel her emotions, I'd have known what she was thinking. "You know what I said," I told her reluctantly. "I can't give you a name because that's an owner's job. You know that, right?" She lifted her paws and placed them on my knees, then looked into my eyes so soulfully that her feelings shot right to my trembling, cowardly heart. "It's not that I don't want to," I said, hoping she could feel the truth in my words. "I always wanted a dog when I was growing up, and I used to imagine the names I'd give them. Doug the pug, Daniel the spaniel, Eva the retriever." As I spoke the last name, the puppy gave the loudest bark I'd ever heard from her. She bounced up and down, and her tail whipped so hard on my leg that it stung. Love and excitement blasted from her. It took me a second to realize why. "What, you're a retriever? I know that. I was just saying. I wasn't saying that was your name, I was just—" I stopped. We'd been together less than 24 hours, and they had been a hectic 24 hours too, what with releasing her from captivity, the demon and the frost elf, not to mention the long car journey where she hadn't even needed to stop for a break and all she'd had to eat had been a share of my cereal bars. Throughout it all, she hadn't let out a single whine. Then I remembered how I'd had my best night's sleep in more than half a decade in my cold and rusty car, just because she was next to me. I sighed. There was no point denying it. I had bonded with her far more than I'd done with anyone or anything since I'd left Witchlight. It wasn't the sort of bond that anyone from non-magical family could ever forge. And how could I send her into the non-magical world after all the things she had seen? It wouldn't be fair. I realized that I wasn't thinking about what was best for her. I was trying to convince myself because, at that moment, I wanted nothing more than to scoop her up, carry her up to the apartment, and fall asleep with her on my chest. Would that really be so bad? I'd gone long enough without real friendship and love, and I was willing to bet it was the same for her. She'd been born in a puppy mill, for goodness sake, and locked in cage from the moment she was born. As I looked down at her, I felt a smile twisting the corner of my lips. "Eva, then. Eva, my retriever. You're okay with that?" She wagged her tail again and gave a sharp bark as she bounced up and licked me on the cheek. "Oh, I'll take that as a yes," I said, laughing, as I wiped away her doggy spit. I opened my arms, and she jumped into them. As we cuddled, she snuffled her little head into my pocket and pulled out my keychains with her teeth. "Hey," I objected, "give me back my keys, you little pickpocket." She blithely ignored me and trotted over to where Rosie the rust bucket was parked. "You want to go for a drive?" I asked. She barked once, chased her tail for a moment, then pointedly pawed at Rosie again. "Why not?" I murmured. I could give the elves some privacy, and I really needed to get some supplies for Eva. Dog food, collar, lead, some toys, treats. I opened the passenger door and climbed in. Eva hopped in after me. I was going to make sure she was the most spoiled dog in the world. After all, she'd already saved me from a demon, and if that didn't deserve treats, what did? This has been Secrets of the Frostbound Cottage, an urban fantasy story, Witchlight Magical Mysteries, written by Heather G. Harris and Ella Stone, narrated by Elise Gibbs. The next book in the series is Secrets of the Forgotten Heir. If you would like to support Heather on Patreon, a monthly subscription service, then you can do so from as little as $1 a month. If you'd like to hear about Heather and Ella's gossip, new releases and bargains, please sign up to her VIP newsletter at heathergharris.com/subscribe and Ella's at www.ellastoneauthor.com. And please do feel free to check out their direct stores, where all sorts of goodies and merchandise awaits you.